All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video as much as I did. 2 points to note that were most important in that video is that shame is understood as a fear of disconnection. When we have shame, we end up disconnecting from other people. And shame is the inability to admit either when we were wrong or we've done something. We just don't want to admit our wrongs to people. And once we open up and become vulnerable and share these things, oddly enough, we actually become more connected with people, which is weird because in our heads we go, oh, if I tell anyone, they're going to disown me. But when we become vulnerable and we put ourselves in a good, safe space and we share that, we lift ourselves of the burden of it. And what's really cool about that is then we become free because vulnerability is literally the birthplace of joy. All right, the joy of living, of creativity, and the belonging of loving. Like, because we are vulnerable, we are then opening up ourselves of being understood and seen, right? Because we are not alone in the world. You can think of all the terrible shit you've done in this world or whatever. Someone else has done it and someone else has been forgiven and they'll forgive you too. So I say this because a lot of times when we start bullying, which is our next thing, when we bully, what we are ultimately doing is, again, disconnecting. We are trying not to be a part of. And bullying, again, comes from fear. We're trying to disconnect from something we don't like about them. And if we don't like something about them, it's ultimately something we don't like about ourselves. So what we're doing when we're bullying is disconnecting. And, not just them from us, but us from others. Okay, so bullying is not attractive. Some people might be like, oh man, someone might argue me on that. But when you look at bullying, deep down we know that that's an insecurity, that they're afraid of something, right? And so when they're picking or joking or doing whatever and making someone else look or feel bad, that's because they're afraid of people looking at them. Again, look at Lovey. And look at how Lovey was so quick to point to Phyllis and be like, oh, she got the eraser in her nose, right? Her first instinct was, get it off of me and give it to somebody else, versus accepting it and be like, why do y'all care if I'm good or bad at math, right? So we can also, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but even Mr. Harvey was a bully. He was a huge bully. He was a bully to the students for not knowing proper English. And we're going to talk about literacy in the next time. But even then, where's his fear? Why does he care so much about their success, right? Or is he afraid of the fact that everything that he's worked towards in being a teacher is maybe just not the end all be all of existence? Like, maybe he's, not that he's wrong, but that maybe people can succeed without his help in being proper, in English. So anyway, that's a whole different thing that we will talk about a little bit later. The biggest thing to understand about bullying is that when people are trying to use the First Amendment as an excuse for bullying, when they say things like, well, it's my First Amendment right to say whatever I want, well, when you start causing harm and more traumas, at some point, we got to draw the line here. Like, it's one thing to say the truth of something, but what is really behind the truth and the manipulation that you're trying to do, right? So we have to just be mindful of the things that we say. So first and foremost, when we talk about bullying or civil harassment, like at what point are we just going too far? And we do have to have these checks and balances, because if we don't have something to say, all right, man, you just gone too far. If we don't have that, then before we know it, there's going to be a constant battle for that top, to the point where we're a shit show. I mean, I've seen politicians standing on their pulpit bullying up there and people clapping and having a good time. And I'm like, that is some terrible raunchy shit they're saying. Like, shocking because to me, it just seems, of all the places we would want people of power to be more balanced and understanding of all humans, versus so decisive and, anyway, that's my thought process. What the fuck do I know? In the end, I see from my experience the insecurities coming from that. And so for me, I'm like, wow, you're that insecure, but you're going to be in power. Like, what other things are you capable of if that's your behavior? So It doesn't matter who or what. It doesn't, no sides. That's not being political here. I'm just saying people who are politicians in general will do that. And you see that a lot of times as we, come up to elections, hateful ads. It doesn't matter what side. The second I see a hateful ad, I'm like, this is bullshit. I get angry. In fact, it's a deterrent for me as a voter. I'm like, that's the kind of, campaign they want to run is, bashing the other person. I don't give a fuck about that. Tell me about you, right? So again, bullying in the end isn't something that's necessarily like attractive. I mean, whatever. Some people might argue with that. I don't know. The idea here is civil harassment laws say that harassment itself is unlawful violence, right? So unlawful violence or assault, battery, or stalking, right? So that's a part of harassment. It's also credible threat or violence, and I'm going to talk about violence in a second here, or the violence or threats seriously scare, annoy, or harass someone, and there's no valid reason for it. So the problem here is when it comes to the law, that term violence is when they do something, which is kind of annoying. When you're being bullied and someone's calling you ugly, that's not against the law. It's annoying and it's stupid, but nothing you can do about it. You just have to kind of, suck it up, buttercup, as I've been told as a kid, unfortunately. Suck it up, buttercup. They're just words, sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? Unless they're violent words. So when it comes to harassment, and it becomes a disturbance to some extent, where they can scare, annoy, or harass someone, there's no valid reason for it, then that's where it becomes harassment. So when I say, there's certain things, the reason why I say this is I've had times where I have been harassed and stalked, and until there was a violent element to it, they really weren't going to do anything. So that's just something that was kind of frustrating for me. But because it was consistent, that's when they go, oh, and then they were seeing some of the words where it was more intimidating and scaring, and it did seem more like there was a threat there, and that's kind of when they start to take the next step. The reason why I gave you the other reading about the bullies where First Amendment rights took place is the kids were drawing a picture of another kid, and the thing that we want to be mindful of here is the reason why that quote-unquote First Amendment became an issue is that the one that had engaged in the conduct had substantially disrupted the school activities. So at some point when this bullying, when you're just like trying to have fun, I have a right to say whatever I want, it starts to become disturbing to people, whether it's their health and well-being. Because when we talk about bullying, there's a trauma. Literally with Lovey, what she did is she took her trauma and she put it on Pillis. And now Pillis has that, right? And it gets in Pillis's way of her trying to do work. She's like, I'm just sitting here. What is your deal? And then the kids jump on that. So it's now disrupting her. So yeah. First Amendment rights is important to be mindful of. Like, I want you to be open and free to feel comfortable and vulnerable within this classroom. But we also need to be mindful of when we're saying things, are we doing it out of insecurities and fears? If we're going to argue a work that we're reading, really look at that. So especially when we start talking about triggering things like, I don't know, identities or whatever, really think like, why are people afraid of that? Why do you care if someone says they want to be called he, she, or they? If you want to be called he and someone keeps calling you she, you'd be offended, right? And then at some point, if no one stopped it and they kept doing it, it would feel like harassment, wouldn't it? Right? So these are the things to be mindful is if we hate these things, what are we really fearing? Okay, so just be mindful of that. If your urge is to, you read an article and you have the urge to bully or to pick at it and, make comments, go, I wonder why I want to do that. What's my issue? What's my fear? What group or thing am I a part of that is creating this environment in my brain that makes me want to hate? What is that? So these are the things I want you to be mindful of as we move forward. So that being the case, I really truly only have one simple question, and it was going to revert back to that vulnerability and understanding that instead of the urge to be hateful, to be fearful, or to reject, instead of that instinct, take a minute, and if your instinct's to be all catty and sassy or whatever, stop yourself and go, why am I being this way? What's my real, why am I triggered, as it were? Why do I have this urge to reject? Why is this coming? And then ask yourself, what can I do different? What can I do different to understand and be more mindful as we move forward in the things that we cover, right? We're just going to be open and willing. That's all, just open and willing. Be mindful. That's all we're asking. I'm not telling you, what you got to think aside from maybe thinking about your thinking while you're thinking. That's it. All right. Okay, so if you have any questions or concerns, you're free to email me. And also reach out to your peers. I really want you to kind of feel comfortable reaching out to peers. You don't know them, be vulnerable. They're in the same boat as you. If you got a question, they probably have the same exact question and they might have the answer too. So, all right, one more quiz question after this and you are done.